Faced with a growing housing crisis, the last government brought in emergency measures to boost the number of homes which could be built as quickly as possible. Now, these included a fast-track planning process for strategic housing developments of 100 homes or more, as well as new guidelines on height and density, which could override local authority plans. Now, with just over 4,000 homes coming through the SHD process this year, today the Department of Housing has confirmed that it'll be wound up early. Una Smith reports on what went wrong.
As part of the last government's Rebuilding Ireland policy to tackle the housing crisis, successive Fine Gael ministers backed strategic housing developments as a way of boosting housing supply.
The number one priority for this government from the Taoiseach down is to solve a housing crisis.
It's an absolute priority for the country, the housing issue. And I'm determined to take action as quickly as I can.
But this fast-track planning process for large-scale housing has had mixed success.
The SHD process was introduced for a more effective and timely delivery of homes.
It got off to a great start, but then when we talk about is it delivering housing units, at the moment it's not, and the system is broken.
So far this year, of just under 13,000 homes proposed for development as SHDs, only 1/3 have been granted permission. The other 2/3 of applications were rejected by An Bord Pleanála or are being legally challenged by local communities. One such development being challenged is on the site of an old flour mill on the Royal Canal in Phibsborough. The SHD plan is to flatten the silo tower and replace it with 3 build-to-rent apartment blocks of 205 apartments. Locals say they were bypassed by the SHD process and scrambled to share information.
Nobody knew what an SHD was until this came to our doorstep. We had to learn an awful lot in a very short amount of time.
Locals here spent years calling for more housing and had agreed a previous development plan, only to be confronted this year with a wholly new SHD plan.
We had a perfectly good plan for this site back in 2014 from the same developer who did it in what we thought was a very sympathetic way to the local area. We welcomed that as a community. We were included in the process of trashing out that plan. But the SHD legislation came out in 2016, and what seems to have happened is all that good work just got thrown out the window.
Community representatives say that government interventions to speed up more housing actually put it into reversal.
The SHD legislation was introduced, and that effectively sent developers back to the drawing board to squeeze more people in.
Under the original plans for this site, there would be a mixture of low-rise and high-rise, 2 apartment buildings of 6 stories high, in keeping with local structures. Under the SHD plan, there will be 3 apartment blocks, one of which will be 12 stories, vastly exceeding the height of the silo and the mill. Dublin City Council recommended the development be rejected because the building heights and insufficient public space violate city plans. Waterways Ireland was also opposed over ecological concerns. Yet in May this year, the plans were approved by An Bord Pleanála.
It's the An Bord Pleanála looking at the national development plan, not local area plans. And that's why local authorities, in particular councillors, object at a normal stage in the traditional planning and don't get that same opportunity under the SHD. So the planners are involved and it's a pure planning question.
The community say this pure planning approach to large-scale housing denies proper local input. The SHD planning process is different in that it brings together the developer with the local council's planning authority and An Bord Pleanála to hammer out an acceptable planning application over 14 weeks. Only once this application is formally submitted to the board can local people make observations or objections. Unlike the normal planning process where the community can provide input once the local planning authority receives the planning application. With SHD, there's no independent right of appeal, unlike the normal process where third parties can appeal from their planning authority to An Bord Pleanála. The government says that SHDs can bring much needed densities to cities and people have got to get used to this. Others disagree that density is the issue.
This is not an undense city. This city overall, within the Dublin City Council area, is nearly 5,000 people per square kilometre. That's more than Berlin, it's more than Vienna, it's more than it's more than Stockholm, it's less than Copenhagen.
According to the Planning Alliance, of approximately 64,000 homes approved as SHDs to date, only 14%, or 8,815, have been commenced or built. Even with the COVID shutdown, this is a poor ratio.
It does take time after grant of planning permission to get your finances in order to agree your obligations with the local authority of what's needed for that project.
But developers say that communities taking judicial reviews is blocking development and worsening our housing crisis.
Our own members are reporting a hesitancy in some cases to move forward with SHD applications. They have reported in some cases indefinitely postponing some of those applications.
In Delgany, County Wicklow, the housing development proposed is the kind that large parts of the country are crying out for, mainly 2- and 3-bedroomed homes for sale and also 2- and 3-bedroomed apartments. The local community were initially very keen.
I totally accept. We really do need housing and we need it now. We fully understand that this site will be developed. There's a housing need, it has to be developed.
But when the housing plans came through, locals saw them as an overdevelopment.
Just to put this in perspective, this plan for 232 units would double the population of the village on a site that is 1/7 the size of the village. So this is a huge density into a small village. We have an infrastructural deficit in terms of schools, roads, public transport. For example, there are children in our local national school who are in 6th class. In excess of 100 of them, earlier this year, had no secondary school to go to.
Delgany residents are supported in this by many councillors, TDs, and crucially, the Chief Executive of Wicklow County Council. In his report to An Bord Pleanála, he said the following: the proposed SHD is not recommended. The density of the development would materially contravene the local area plan to provide for sustainable residential communities up to a maximum of 22 units per hectare. Yet in February, An Bord Pleanála approved it. Delgany residents say they now are fundraising to take a judicial review.
The response from people has been so strong. People have given €5, €10. Some people gave €50. This has been a real community effort.
So far this year, 1/3 of all An Bord Pleanála decisions have gone to judicial review, with nearly all succeeding.
Where the planning permission is granted by An Bord Pleanála, but then somebody takes an action, a court action, and in 92% of the cases they have been quashed and the people have to start again.
One of the reasons that strategic housing developments are being legally challenged is that they often violate local area plans. In addition, the 2018 ministerial guidelines on new building heights and apartment sizes override standards laid down in local area and city plans, but must be enforced by An Bord Pleanála.
The ministerial guidelines allow a lower standard than the development plan. So in that sense, the board has to accept the minister's mandatory requirements, no matter what the development plan says. So they're boxed into it too. Once the material contraventions came through, the judicial reviews went up and up and up.
These new 2018 height guidelines adopted for an SHD plan on the Bailey Gibson Player Will site in Dublin 8 is exactly what's causing upset there. In an already dense part of the city, the first phases of the vast plan include 10 built-to-rent apartment blocks, 3 the approximate height of Liberty Hall. Plans for 1,500 homes on this site are currently on hold. This is because the High Court has referred the plans to the European Court of Justice over concerns that the heights of the buildings are in excess of what's allowed under the City Development Plan. Local resident Liz O'Brien, whose home is adjacent to the site, worries that if the development goes ahead, her quality of life will be affected.
I mean, this little bit of green space that I have. I love to sit out here. You know, if the weather permits it all, I love to sit out here, have peace out here.
She believes that 3 planned apartment blocks next to her home will negatively impact her.
Having 16, 11 and 6 stories bearing down on top of me, the light will be gone from this area. So, no, I'm not happy with that whatsoever. The 11-storey building to the right here will be approximately 20 to 22 feet in distance from the side of my house. And the 6-storey, I believe, will be just here where you're standing, and then behind that will be the 16 stories.
The high-rise apartment blocks contained in the development are based on a 2020 master plan agreed by the developer Hines and Dublin City Council. When the local community heard of the plans, they had 5 weeks to review over 5,000 pages of technical documents.
I think 174 people put in observations on the first round, and we all get the same standard letter back from Royal Penola, you know, not addressing your observations.
The new plans overrode what was allowed under a 2017 master plan, previously agreed by the City Council and its councillors and supported by the community.
At some point then, a new master plan was developed by Hines, the main applicant here, along with DCC, and it replaced the 2017 plan. And why? You know, why was somebody allowed to change the rules of the game? Why was somebody allowed, you know, develop this?
This question has also been referred by the High Court to the European Court of Justice, whether the new area master plan allowing the SHD plans is legitimate. In the 18 months it'll take to get a judgment, a further 700 homes planned by the Land Development Agency on an adjacent site are also consequently on hold. Referrals to Europe are also having a wider impact.
There's potential impact for some 69,000 homes to be affected because of the recent referrals to Europe. A combination of apartments, homes and student bed accommodations. All those could be in jeopardy depending on the decisions that will come back from the European Court of Justice.
The Department of Housing confirmed today that strategic housing developments will end early this October. A new scheme will return decision-making to the local authority and a citizen's right of appeal to An Bord Pleanála. It also plans to change the law allowing the use of judicial review in planning.
The fundamental problem with it is that planning was always a contract between the citizen and the state and the executive. There was public participation, public consultation. SHD and the ministerial guidelines have torn that contract in half.
You could see a very improved system that will lead to significant numbers of homes delivered in any given year.
Well, Una is here now with more on this. And Una, where exactly does the government go from here?
Well, we've heard today that they're actually going to wind up the strategic housing development process early by October, the end of October. So, and we also know that they're going to reintroduce some of the elements of the traditional planning process. So therefore, the planning authority in the local council is going to make the first decision and they'll restore the right of appeal to An Bord Pleanála. They're also saying that they will introduce the timeframes, the tight timeframes that were in the SHD process will be applied to this new scheme. So it'll be about 32 weeks. And the reaction from industry is that this is good. We need to create those efficiencies again that were achieved under SHD. But there's a lot of detail and we'll hear more after a Cabinet meeting this day next week.
So the Department of Housing is also considering changes to the judicial review aspect of all of this?
Yes, this has come out in recent times. There is much more concern about this also in terms of being politically controversial because we know traditionally the Greens would be very opposed to tinkering with anything that could alter the rights of public participation, of decision-making by public bodies. We know also that there was a bill previously published by the outgoing government which showed that they wanted to change the grounds for taking judicial appeal, judicial review, also the standing and perhaps imposing fees. And we also know that from the SHD process that there weren't that many vexatious claims in planning anyway. 92% of them were actually succeeding. So there is concern about this. But again, this is going to the Joint Housing Committee and we'll see more details there.
We have seen in the past when we've seen tinkering with the planning process that it has had the unintended effect of slowing things down instead of speeding things up. Yeah. And I'm just wondering, is there a danger that could happen here?
Yes, and this is massively important because obviously the end game here is to get more houses built. And we saw that with heights and density changes. They went back to the drawing board. From what we understand, because the scheme is going to be changed at the end of October, there is a chance that it could slow things down until then if developers think that the newer scheme will be smoother and more efficient. We don't know that because also they're reintroducing rights of appeal. So that's one of those wait and sees. But it's also very important to remember is that planning in itself and tinkering with planning, a lot of people say, just don't do it because actually properly resource planning authorities and on board Panola and you get greater efficiencies. And lastly, planning in itself doesn't build houses, we know. They're two distinct things. And we saw that from SHDs. Lots of units approved but not built. So that's the other part of this that has to be addressed.
All right, Una, thank you very much.